What's going on, YouTube? Thanks for tuning into the channel. It's your boy Devin Coates. If you haven't already, download the Get Right Starter Kit. It's in the link below in the description. Just to get started, so this is the first part of my book breakdown of Mastery. So I'm going to cover the intro and the first two parts. So discovering your life's task and submitting to the ideal apprenticeship, or submit to reality the ideal apprenticeship. So yeah, just to get started, so the intro is really all about the fact that we're evolutionarily designed for what Robert Greene calls mastery. And what he calls mastery is this heightened sense that we've all felt at some point. So maybe it was a deadline. If you're younger and you're in high school or college, maybe it's like, you have a project due, and then all of a sudden, you have a day, you have a couple hours to finish it. You're just moving with this heightened sense of things are just working out, things just come together, you just know what to do. Actually, something where you felt it a lot was when I used to wait tables. So when you got a huge rush, you used to make way less mistakes, and it would almost feel like you don't know. I mean, after it happened so many times, you didn't really panic, but I know the first couple of times I would be like, I don't know how I'm gonna do everything. You're running around with like a chicken with its head cut off, but you just know how to move things. You know what food you need to bring out first, what tables you need to touch because they just sat down, how to bring out the drinks. Everything just seems to come together. The problem is most people can't hold on to that for their regular life. They can't harness that feeling. It goes away immediately when the deadline's pushed off, immediately when they're not in an act of necessity. Another time I know I felt it was every time that I was unemployed, or if I needed to find a place to live really fast. I always found out how to make everything work. Or a great example for me was I had this kind of task in order to go to a trip for work, my first business trip for the company I'm working for now. I had to set a bunch of meetings, which I knew was nobody else set that many meetings for that, and I kind of outdid everybody, and I was only there for like 6 months. That feeling, he says, is something we all know, and that's what mastery is. Our society teaches us that it's something that it's like, just people that are talented get it and things like that, and we start to kind of worship people that are like the self-destructing artist that drinks a lot and smokes and does coke and comes up with this crazy thing. Anything that takes effort is something not valued in our culture, and we think of that feeling of mastery as something only people that are talented get. Robert Greene completely throws that out the window and says that actually there is a process. It's very easy, well, it's very simple to kind of see, and that's what the book is broken down with. And then he goes very briefly into the fact that 6 million years ago, our ancestors really had two distinct things that separated them from, especially other land animals, but other animals in general. Since we came from the trees, we had eyes in the front of our heads. Most land animals actually have eyes on the sides of their head so they can scan, and a peripheral, and they can see quick movement. So if you're a deer, or even if you're a lion, you want to see something moving because you either want to know something's coming for me, I need to run away, or something is in my eyes, I should go and attack it. And this is kind of is more of a distracting mind instead of a focusing mind, and that's where he says there's a big difference between us, since eyes are in our front of our heads in the trees from our early ancestors before 6 million years ago. We would have to be able to focus on depth to move efficiently through trees. You have to see depth, you have to see colors, tell berries, be able to judge a lot of things. So focus was a big thing. So we had this focus that allowed us to do things. And then we also had a social culture that it caused our brains to evolve. If you ever read the Red Queen theory, that's basically what that book is. I digress, but basically our minds and our brains became very intricate to handle and deal with the social bonds and social constraints and contexts that we constantly live in, because you can't survive on your own. Like, humanity needs other people. So the social part, and that's basically giving us the ability to focus on one task very deeply, and with a brain that can that's very developed from doing these social tasks, so we can observe other people socially to learn what we need to do and focus very deeply. So that's the intro. Now I'm going to jump into the other portions of things. I'm going to stick away from the stories just in the interest of time. I am writing something, so you can kind of refer to that if you really want to see all the stories. So let me jump right into the discovering your life's task. So for discovering your life's task, first thing Robert Greene starts with is a story of Leonardo da Vinci, and he calls this the hidden force. And Leonardo da Vinci had this idea that when he was on his deathbed, there was this life force that guided him through all of his actions. Now, I'm not going to go very deep into his story, but long story short, he was the illegitimate son of a notary person, which he had access to a lot of paper as a youngster, which was very abnormal at that time. So he used to draw on nature, and he loved to draw. He loved flowers. He loved to see how things morphed. He ended up taking an apprenticeship with Verrocchio. He studied all these different things that was kind of like different than other people. He paid a lot of attention to detail. After he finished that, he started to work on a few different things. I think he was supposed to be commissioned to do the Sistine Chapel, but Michelangelo was chosen over him, and he really didn't like the method that painters had to go through. You know, you had to kind of you were just at the whims of the nobles, and he kind of changed the business model. He became more of an advisor, studied a bunch of other things, but his main point was like there was something inside him that was always driving him to make these novel decisions, these decisions that were not the same as like the beaten path, or what nobody could recommend that for you. These are things that just came from him. He felt the drive and he always followed it, and that's what he's very interested in, and that is how you discover your life's task. The first one is to return to your origins and your primal inclination. So that's the first way to discover your life's task. And this he talked about Einstein and Everett, Daniel Everett. So Albert Einstein, we probably all have heard of him. He had a deep love for or a deep interest in magnetism as a kid. The first time he ever saw, you know, when you put like a magnet and like a pin in, I think it's Mercury, and it spins around and points north, he found that very fascinating. So that's something that was always as a kid he was so interested in that he found back to that, and then he could do some of his theories on relativity and things of the sort. And for Daniel Everett, he was actually an anthropologist, and his story is very, very interesting. If you do go deeper into the book or read what I end up producing that breaks everything down, he was an anthropologist. He was always interested in, you know, Mexican culture, and he learned Mexican culture and the Spanish language and a lot of those things when he lived in America at a very, very early age. His wife that he ends up marrying, they were missionaries, so they were always traveling, and she traveled, so he was always interested in that, and he actually becomes an anthropologist and missionary, and things change, but he ends up going in South America to study the Piraha, and this all stemmed from a deep love and inclination he had as a kid. So this is nothing you need to actually do. You just need to kind of get in touch with that inner voice. What did you like as a kid? What were you just viscerally drawn to as a kid? And use that to discover what you need to do. One is to occupy the perfect niche, the Darwinian strategy. So he goes through two stories, Ramachandran and Yoki Matsuoka, in this one to describe it. And really what this is that you need to find that little spot in environment. You know, all animals occupy a little niche that they kind of dominate, and in business that word is used a lot, like a niche, a little sector that they're dominating, that they can take ownership of. To briefly use their backbones as to explain this, Ramachandran from India, he was always interested in collecting seashells. There's one particular one, I think it's pronounced the Xenophora, And basically what this organism does is it like takes other shells and kind of uses it as camouflage to live. And he's very interested in that. He's interested in like a lot of weird shit, and his dad didn't really like that, so he sent him to medical school. He didn't like medical school, so basically he goes on this path of you know, going towards what he likes. So he was very a romantic scientist. He liked experimenting, not rote memorization, which being a doctor is really mostly consists of. So he did all these experiments. He gets something published. He actually gets invited to go to Cambridge. He didn't like Cambridge, so he jumps out of this, reads this other book that interests him, and then he finds his niche, which is it was like mental abnormalities that, like, it was a phantom limb syndrome. So people that got their arms cut off still felt pain in their arm even though it wasn't there. That was what was interesting to him, so that's what he found. But it came from him not following the beaten path. So jumping out of medical school, reading this book about the eyes and brain and optical illusions and writing a paper on it, going to Cambridge, not liking that, reading a different book, writing a different paper, and finding this little niche. Yoki Matsuoka was a bit different. She was always a little bit different as a Japanese young girl. In Japan at the time she was born, things were really like kind of laid out for you. You had to like just follow a specific path. She did sports. She was pretty good at it, but she was never awesome at it. She always kind of folded under pressure. She did tennis. She didn't really want to stay in Japan because of the way that like you had to just pick a career and go with it. So she moves to America. When she goes to America, she doesn't really know what she wants to do. So she's kind of like, she ends up getting into like robotics, and she likes robotics, but then she still likes anatomy from her sports days, and she ends up combining them to do a lot of work on creating prosthetic hands. So it kind of combine both of those fields together to create a perfect niche. Very similar to Ramachandran, how he took, you know, his deep inclination in medical school and then his ideas of the mind, and combines that to make a niche. So that's the second one. And in environment, as I mentioned before, organisms find a niche. That's what you're trying to do when you want to discover your life's task, something you can dominate that really resonates with yourself. So number 3 is avoid the false path, the rebellion strategy. So this all goes through Mozart. So basically this is, you don't want to accept something that looks like it looks like your life's path, but it really isn't. So maybe you get into a field and it was a stepping stone, but you know you're making a lot of money, so you don't want to leave it because you're scared to leave that cushy corporate sector. So that would be an example of continuing on the false path. So you want to jump back to what is your real end goal. And Patrick Bet-David, who I like a lot, Valuetainment YouTube channel, he always says solving for X. So what are you solving for? So that's kind of the question. What is your life's path? What did you originally start this for, and was that accomplished? So with Mozart, just to quickly run down his story, his dad Leopold basically he was a very famous musician. He knew Mozart was great. His sister was very good too. They did these child acts, made their family a lot of money. And then, but when they got old, the kind of novelty wore off. People weren't really as interested. Mozart wasn't really inspired by the work either. They went around and tried to find him all these kind of jobs. And basically his dad finds him this like composer job with some bishop. And cutting out all the details, he really wasn't doing anything. He was gonna get paid, it was gonna be alright, but he's basically like a fucking glorified secretary. He just was doing whatever the bishop wanted. He was doing very menial tasks. He was a very illness-prone child. So he had always this feeling he was gonna die early, which foreshadowing, he does die early. And basically his dad, he runs away, and his dad and the bishop are fucking pissed, and they're like, just come back, all will be forgiven. And basically Mozart doesn't come back, and then he composes some of the, and creates some of the greatest pieces that he's ever created when he leaves. But he basically never spoke to his dad again. That was like, his dad took that, you abandoned the family. So his was like the ultimate cost. He lost his whole family with his decision. But had he stayed there, some of the greatest works that we ever had. I know he did like Don Juan, an opera of Don Juan, so that like that story and other things like that, like he brought a lot of things to life that would have never been brought to life had he just stayed in that it wasn't exactly a composer job. I might be getting the words wrong, but he was a glorified secretary. He would never been able to make any of those works. He didn't have that kind of flexibility to do what he wanted to do. So imagine if he never did that and what that would have done to music. So number 4 is let go of the past, the adaptation strategy. So if you guys are into fighting sports, Freddie Roach, very great trainer. I'm really into combat sports, so I loved reading this. Freddie Roach, so he was groomed to be a boxer at a very young age. I'm cutting out some of the story. He ends up making it professional, and as a professional fighter, he was pretty good. He did very well, and as he started to rise to that elite level, it was like he would get into these fights, but when he would get trained, he would do well, but then once he got hit a few times, he would just start fighting with emotion, and the whole game plan would be completely thrown out the window, and he would lose a lot of bouts. So basically, long story short, he isn't completely successful as a boxer. He's forced to retire at a not a super young age, but a young age in the grand scheme of life, but it's a not super young age for boxing. So then he's very lost. His trainer was Eddie Futch, and he's a legend in the sport. Eddie Futch is a legend in the sport. But basically, he takes a job, and he's basically getting very depressed, and he doesn't even want to look at boxing. And this happens to a lot of people that do professional sports and that might have a debilitating injury. They don't even want to look at it. They don't even want to be reminded of it because it reminds them of what they lost or what they lost in the past. So by letting go of the past, he ends up just, for some reason, and this is that whole hidden force thing that is like such a recurring theme. For some reason, he just finds himself in Eddie Futch's gym. He sees some of the trainers, and for free, he doesn't know why. It's almost like despite himself, he is just starts hanging around there. He sees that Eddie Futch has a stable of fighters. Everybody's not getting this individualized attention. So he's like, you know, why don't I start giving people attention? He starts giving advice, and some of the fighters are starting to gravitate towards him. And then he notices something interesting. Eddie Futch was very good at teaching him the footwork, the punches, the 1-2s, the 3, 4, 5, 6, like the different combinations and how to hold the guard and techniques. But he was a little bit disconnected. And if you've ever been in any kind of sport, especially in combat sports and one-on-one, like things are evolving so fast, and he wasn't really moving around with this. So he saw something from some of the Cuban fighters where they were taking the mitts, and you've seen this before if you've seen anything, but this was revolutionary at the time. They're taking the mitts, we're actually having the boxers fight with the mitt and like throwing, you know, punches in the ring with the mitt work. So he was like, oh, this is pretty interesting, and then this can also bring me more alive because I can feel like I'm boxing again. So he started to do mitt work with the fighters and jump in the ring and actually simulate a real fight, and the boxers were really drawn towards this, and this is really how he kind of let go of his past, and then he found himself. Long story short, with a lot of other things, he was able to basically let go of the past and adapt. Instead of being a professional boxer, now he's a professional trainer. So that's really what the adaptation strategy is. So maybe you went down a path and it seems like you judged the outcome as negative, but you learned a bunch of skills. You learned and have a lot of experience that can also be tied together and be used. And this kind of foreshadows some of the other book, and that's a main thing he talks about in Mastery. It's not a linear path. It's you can kind of write it linearly, but it's not necessarily linear. So, you know, he gained all this information. He can combine it and adapt it into his life's task, which did revolve around boxing. So everything he did was not for nothing, as he might have felt in that interim, that middle period between his boxing career and the start of his training career. And the fifth one, and this is the last one before the reversal, is Buckminster Fuller, and this was Finding Your Way Back. So this is one of the guys I really didn't know who he was. I actually forgot about it since the last time I read the book. But basically what this is that you might have done something in the beginning And it's kind of similar to Freddie Roach. You might have done something in the beginning and then kind of got completely taken away from that, but that was really what you were all about. So long story short, Buckminster Fuller had like problems with eyesight. He was very nearsighted, and he was very into inventions. He invents this like jellyfish ore, and basically he observed jellyfish in the way they moved, and he created an ore that moved the same way, and it was way easier to push the boat across the water. So it was a great invention. And then he goes through his life and really is kind of getting very lost. Like, he goes to Harvard, he gets expelled, he ends up having 2 kids, and he has a wife, and then he has to get a job, he has to start paying for shit. So he gets the sales manager job, he hates it, he ends up leaving that job. He decides to start this business, uses his father's or his father-in-law's money. He loses the family all their money, and he's actually about to kill himself, and he's literally like about to die. Like, he feels so depressed, and then at that moment, and it's almost like a fucking movie, he's feeling depressed, he's about to commit suicide, and he hears this voice in his head tells him not to do it and to cling to his life's task. And what that is inventing. And he invented a lot of things. Like, he was right before the modern car was built. So he built something called like the Dymaxon car and like the Dymaxon engine, and basically he created a lot of inventions which made a lot of like Ford's creations even able. Like, he created a lot of those interim discoveries. Like, a lot of the times, like when people make those big discoveries, there was discoveries that were made and inventions made that didn't get the same notoriety, but at the time they were breakthroughs that made those super breakthroughs possible. So he did a lot of that. He was people that are very into that kind of shit would know, and he basically became successful in that way. So he found his way back to his inventing, hands-on, mechanical nature, even though he got pushed so far off it for decades. And then the last one is reversal, and this is Temple Grandin. So all these are kind of like, go to your strengths, go from what you were viscerally felt and kind of viscerally told and viscerally good at. Temple Grandin is very interesting. She is very severely autistic, and basically it's the complete opposite. She's basically told that, if you ever saw the movie Forrest Gump, she was about to be Forrest Gump. Like, she was about to be like autism, special school, told she never talk, told she never read, all these other things. She ends up learning how to like be a base functional person very young, can't make friends, but she had this very affinity for animals. She could understand animals in a certain way, and she liked to be like squeezed in this chute that they used to squeeze cows in, that would calm them down, because autistic children are kind of very, very sensitive to touch. So what she was able to do was, because she was autistic, she couldn't communicate with other people. She could focus a lot. So she studied a lot about autism, cows. She took then she moved to psychology in school. She studied so much she was able to actually be a good student, which is very hard for somebody in her case. And she started studying animal science, and she ends up helping feedlots and making them more humane, because she could sense what the animals were sensing and some of the problems where basically they're having a lot of cows killed just strictly off of poor design and causing too much anxiety for the animals. And that's not very good. If you're a slaughterhouse, you can't, like FDA and other things, like you can't just serve, if the cow died before it got to the thing, you can't serve it. So like, she was saving them tons of money. And basically what this reversal is that if you have weaknesses, don't even fucking go towards you. Just focus 100% on your strengths, like Temple Grandin did. Her affinity for animals, her power of focus, that really led her to where she could go. Her love of psychology, because she was autistic and she wanted to learn that. So that's really kind of the base of how to discover your life's task that he goes through in the book. So thanks for watching that one. In the interest of time, I'm gonna actually do the submit to reality portion in another video. So if you haven't already, click on the link in the description below. Download the Get Right Starter Kit. It's going to show you everything in terms of creating a lifestyle of design, creating morning and night routines for success. tips and must-do things to take your game to the next level. Completely free. Just click on the link below. It's a free download. But if you like the content, click the like button, leave a comment below, hit the dislike if you didn't like it, subscribe to the channel. It's your boy Devin Coates. Until next time, peace out.